Alright, this video is on section 1.5 and we're going to look at solving and graphing inequalities. There's a couple key ideas I want you to remember when you're solving and graphing inequalities. The first one deals with solving, and you're going to solve it just like an equation. There is one difference, and the difference is the signs. Instead of having an equal sign, what we would in an equation, we have inequality signs. And they are greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. And I'm just going to abbreviate them, GT, GTE. Notice that the equal to has this line on the bottom. That means we want to include the number, and that'll make more sense when we solve it. We have less than, and then less than or equal to, so LT and LTE. One thing that a lot of people struggle with is telling the difference between greater than and less than signs. Less than signs will make an L. Okay, there's an L. Notice that our less than signs, they make that L shape. They don't make an L because it's slanted, it's curved, it looks a little different, but they make that L shape. So that's one way to remember which ones are which. So there's two things. It's just like an equation. The difference is that there are signs, and there's one more rule that we need to remember. And when we have inequalities, if we multiply or divide by a negative, then our sign changes direction. So if we had a greater than sign and we multiplied by a -2, then it switches to a less than sign. That's all that means. That's an important rule, though, to remember. Now, we'll talk about graphing after we solve an example, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to solve an example. We've got 4y minus 3 is less than, notice that sign makes the L, 5y plus 2. So we're going to solve it just like we would in an equation. I'm going to start with our 3. We're going to add 3. We're going to do the opposite so that it cancels out. We get 4y is less than 5y. Positive 2 plus 3 is 5. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the y's to the other side. So we're going to subtract 5y. And again, just like with an equation, there's more than one way to do this problem. You could have started it differently, and that's fine. Subtract 5y from both sides, so those cancel. 4y minus 5y is negative y, negative 1y, is less than 5. Now we have a negative y. We need that y to be positive. So we're going to divide by a negative 1. We get y is now greater than negative 5. There's the answer to our problem. Notice that we changed the sign because we divided by a negative. Now, one thing I want you to remember, and this will come up more when we do more examples, is that variable always needs to be on the left-hand side. So if for some reason it's not, you need to rewrite the problem so that the variable's on the left-hand side. Now that's one reason I solved the problem the way that I did, so I could move my variable, my y, to the left-hand side to start with. But that's really up to you. You can change it at the end if you need to. But there's the answer to a problem. The next thing I'm going to do is graph it. So we're going to create ourselves a number line. We always have to have 0 on our number line. And then we need two other numbers. One of them has to be the one that's the solution to the problem. So we're going to include negative 5. And then we're going to include the opposite of that number, so positive 5. Now, what's important when we graph these is the circles, because we're going to put a mark on the number. And since this is just strictly greater than, it's an open circle. Less than is the same. So it would look like that. And I'll show you what that looks like on the graph here in a second. If for some reason it has an equal to on it, then it is closed. And it would look like this. Now the difference is whether we want to include the number or not. Open circle means that we don't want to include the number that's given. A closed circle means we do. So when we're looking at the graphs, it can tell us whether, if we just had the graph, we can tell whether it was a greater than or less than or equal to, or if it was just strictly a greater than or a less than, based on the open or closed circle. Well, for this particular one, since it's just greater than, we're going to use an open circle on -5, and we want all the y's that are greater than -5 or larger than -5. So we are going to shade to the right, because that's where all the numbers that are bigger than -5 are. It includes -4, -3, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, everything on up to positive infinity. Okay, so that's how we shade our graph. We would open circle on -5 and then shade everything to the right because we want the numbers bigger. Now I've got a problem here. This is your practice problem. It is 12 is greater than or equal to -0.3p. I want you to pause the video, solve it by yourself, and then come back and watch me work it out and check your answer and make sure you've got everything right. So you need to solve it and then graph it. Go ahead and pause it now and do that. Alright, now that you've worked it out, let's work through this problem. There are no numbers to subtract or add to the other side. The p is on the right hand side and we have a whole number on the left. So what we're going to do is get that p by itself. We're going to divide by -0.3. Now remember, we divided by a negative, so that automatically switches our sign. Those cancel and we're left with p on the right hand side, and then 12 divided by -0.3 is -40. Now, I told you that when you want to write your answer, you need to have the variable on the left. One thing to remember. So we're going to switch this around, and we're just going to mirror image it. Right now, we have -40. Our sign is pointing to the 40 and then the p, so we're going to change it around. We're going to do p. Our sign still needs to point to -40. So there's our answer. We have p is greater than or equal to -40, and that's the answer to our problem. Next thing we have to do is graph it. We're going to sketch out a graph. Remember, we need three numbers. One of them has to be 0. One of them has to be the number from the answer, so -40. The other one is the opposite of that. If p is greater than or equal to -40, since it's equal to, we're going to put a closed circle on -40 because we want to include that number in our answer. And then we want all the p's that are greater than -40. So again, we're going to shade it to the right because that's where all of our numbers bigger than -40 are. And there would be the solution, the answer to our problem. So if you got that, good job, correct. If you didn't, go back and make sure you know where your mistake is at, and then you are finished with the video. The next thing you need to do is watch the video on how to write your answers. So if you understand this, you're good to go on to the next video.